All right, welcome everybody, and we're going to go ahead and get started so Patrice can have the maximum amount of time possible. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Ben Zulop, and I'm the board president of the Reading League Illinois. We've got a great evening planned for you, and I know we're all excited to dive in. So I'm going to do a quick overview of some nuts and bolts for the night, give you a few updates of what's going on with the Reading League Illinois, and then I'll hand things over to Patrice. Tonight we're using a webinar format, which means that, excuse me, your audio and video are disabled, but you can still put questions and comments in the Q&A, which will just be seen by the speakers, or in the chat, which will be seen by everyone. Please feel free to type questions in either place, and we'll monitor those and do our best to get as many of those answered as possible at the Q&A at the very end. Or Patrice is joining us next Monday for our coffee chat, where she can follow up on some questions there. Members are going to receive a recording of this event within 48 hours, and as the evening progresses and resources and links are shared, we'll collect all of those and include them in an email to our members with the recording when that goes out. Finally, if you're interested in getting a certificate of attendance for CEUs and/or Illinois PD hours through ISB, we'll post a link to register for those at the very end. So just a little bit about us. The Reading League Illinois was founded in 2021 as the 19th state chapter of the Reading League, a national education nonprofit led by educators and reading experts dedicated to promoting knowledge and accelerating the global movement towards reading instruction rooted in science. As a state chapter, our all-volunteer board is currently made up of 8 people from around the state who are passionate about improving literacy instruction in Illinois. We come from this work from a variety of perspectives: teachers, parents, instructional leaders, curriculum coaches, dyslexia specialists, but we all share one commitment to working towards literacy and justice for all. On your screen, you'll see our lineup for the webinar lineup for the 25-26 school year, and I couldn't be more excited about it. Tonight is our second of 3 guests who will discuss aspects of learning science, with Blake Harvard continuing the conversation in January. Starting in February and March, we'll focus on writing with Joan Stida and Natalie Wexler, and we'll wrap up the year discussing academic vocabulary with Sean Morrissey in April, and then the knowledge acquisition framework with Dr. K. Rajakumar in May. Our coffee chat format is new this year. Those discussions will continue the conversation from that month's webinar, as each guest will recommend a short article to read that helps us bridge research to practice. Coffee chats used to be for members only. However, in order to create a larger community, we're going to open these up to anyone who is interested, members and non-members. Our next coffee chat will take place next Saturday, and I'm really looking forward to developing our learning community with you. I hope you'll be able to join us. Now, to keep up with all this great learning, please consider becoming a member. It costs us just as little as $25 to join, and benefits include our monthly coffee chat series, grants and scholarship opportunities, and the really good feeling that comes from doing your part for literacy. For a little more money, you can also receive Illinois PD hours for each event you attend. We absolutely do rely on membership dues to fund all of these great events, so please don't hesitate to join and/or make a donation using the QR code on your screen or the link that we'll put in the chat. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm very excited to introduce Patrice Bain. Patrice is a university educator and a speaker. She is the co-author of the U.S. Department of Education's guide, Organizing Instruction and Study to Improve Student Learning, as well as Powerful Teaching, Unleash the Science of Learning. She's also the author of A Parent's Guide to Powerful Teaching, as well as Powerful Classrooms, Evidence-Informed Strategies and Resources. Patrice was an Illinois Teacher of the Year finalist and a Fulbright Scholar in Europe. She has been featured in international podcasts, webinars, presentations, and popular press. Patrice also contributed to the United Nations UNESCO International Science and Evidence-Based Education Assessment, outlining the vision for world education by 2030. Patrice, thanks so much for being here tonight. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I'll mute me, and you can go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Ben. And thank you for bearing with me while I pull up my presentation. I did it! Thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. This is the first time I have ever had an in-person and virtual at the same time, so this is really exciting for me. In the audience here and online, we have teachers, administrators, coaches, parents. It's like a gathering of people who are really interested in learning, and I am excited to be here. So let's get started. I like to start with a quote by Professor Daniel Willingham, which is, "Children are more alike than different in terms of how they think and learn." I'm going to read that one more time because to me it is so profound. Children are more alike than different in terms of how they think and learn. So whether you are at the best school in the world or not, you speak English or not, you're from a very wealthy family or not, children are more alike than different in terms of how they think and learn. Now, a wonderful person from the UK, Paul Kirshner, who has written How Learning Happens, How Teaching Happens, has a great analogy. And he said, learning is kind of like our digestive system. No matter where in the world you put something in, and pretty much we all have the same type of results. Learning is like that. We all learn the same way. Now, just like the digestive system, some people might have diabetes, some might have celiac, some might be gluten or dairy free, and you have to make some modifications. Same with learning, but the same basic steps are the same. And I'll be talking about those tonight. As teachers, we've been taught how to teach. But how many of us have been taught how we actually learn? Dr. Erica Galea from Malta has a wonderful quote. The answer lies in understanding the learning process and essential for any educator aiming to make a real impact in the classroom. We know how to teach. Do we know how we learn? So in the beginning, I had been teaching about 10 or 12 years, and I'd been a finalist for Illinois Teacher of the Year. I had won various awards, and I wasn't a very good teacher. I didn't think. I was the sage on the stage, right? But some of my students learned really well and some didn't. And I couldn't figure out why do some kids learn well and some just don't? My teaching is the same. And at the time, there was no place for me to go to find an answer to that question. At the time, most research, and this was up until 2006, almost all research on learning was done at universities with college students in laboratories. And in 2007, my questions of, well, how? Why? I met two cognitive scientists, Dr. Mark McDaniel and Dr. Henry Roediger, who were who were researching memory. And I had this thought like, could learning have something to do with memory? That was like a novel thing for me, a novel thought. And so I met with them and I told them about I'm frustrated, and they were talking about memory. And it was this wonderful meld. Oh, we're looking for answers. And so my classroom became the first in the United States where cognitive scientists studied how children learn in an authentic classroom. And my answers of why and how got answered. And it led me to the science of learning. And it led me to beginning every single first day of class by telling my students, I'm Mrs. Bain. I'm your teacher, and I'm going to teach you how to learn. And why? because every single year come second quarter, after the report cards had gone out, I would have students come up to me and say, Mrs. Bain, I have a B or I have an A in your class. And it's like, I know. I put the grades in the grade book. I know that. But you would see their demeanor change and they would say, but I don't get good grades. And they would sink a little bit lower and say, I always get D's and F's, and really sink. And this was the dagger to my teacher heart when they would say, I'm not smart. How can we have an educational system where children internalize failure by the time they are 11 years old? We know better than this. We know how to change this. I would take that same enthusiasm to that student and say, but look at you now. The only difference is now you're learning how to learn. A wonderful quote from Meg Lee and Jim Heal, the Learning Science Partners. Knowing how to teach by understanding how students learn is a matter of instructional equity. We know we have students who are the haves and the have-nots, and we know through robust research how to level the playing field so everybody has the same advantage. I like to think of it as learning as this giant party. And too often, our disadvantaged students, our struggling students, simply did not get the invitation to that party. I am hoping that what you're going to learn tonight is going to help you extend that invitation for your students to learn. How do we learn? There's three basic steps. The first is encoding. And what is encoding? It's getting information into our heads. And as teachers, we excel at this. We know our curriculum. We know dozens, hundreds of ways of getting that information into our students and into their heads. And the second step is storage. Encoding, storage. We teach it and it's there, right? And too often, this is where our teacher ed programs kind of stop. But we know there's a very important third step, and this is retrieval. And retrieval is pulling the information out, encoding, storage, and retrieval. Which gets back to the how and why. How can we get this information to our students? Well, I wrote a book. So powerful teaching chronicles the journey that I took with working over 15 years with cognitive scientists, telling the how and the why of robust research for our students. And I talk about power tools in the book, not the kind you see on this screen, but researched principles, robustly researched, that were so powerful. We call them power tools. What are they? Before I get to that, I will give this quote. A quote from Powerful Teaching is, too often we concentrate on putting information into our students' heads. What if instead we concentrated on pulling that information out? So now we'll get to the power tools. The first one is retrieval. And I define retrieval as pulling information out. This is retrieval. Anytime we bring forth memories, we are retrieving. And for the most part, we tend to really like it. We go to trivia nights. We have family lore at the holidays. Thanksgiving is coming up. How many stories will you hear maybe for the 10th time? But we love to talk about, to listen, to revisit those memories with friends, vacations, retrieval. So why is it that this is often the look we get from our students when we ask them to retrieve? Why is it that it brings forth anxiety? And although I'm talking to teachers, parents, I'm also talking to you because you may see as your children are studying for tests the anxiety that they might be feeling. We know why this happens. It happens when retrieval is infrequent and it's for high stakes exams. If our students learn something in September and they don't have a chance to go over it again until a semester exam, retrieval was infrequent and it was for high stakes. And that brings forth anxiety. And something else, just because you see something doesn't mean you know it. Don't look at any devices right now. But what if I asked you to draw the Apple logo? It's an apple, right? Not hard. I'll make it easier for you. Which one is it? It is the top middle. How many times have you seen that logo? Yeah, did you know there was a dip at the bottom or which way the leaf went? Okay, something you see even more often than that. If I gave you a copy of this and I said, draw the apps on your cell phone in order, how many of you could do that? Oh, someone, for those of you, someone in the audience here said theirs are alphabetized and they could do it. But why did I bring forth these examples? Because they lead to ineffective study strategies. Think of the very terms we use. Oh, reread that chapter. See your notes. Look at what you highlighted. The very terminology we are using. Just because you see something does not mean you know it. So, what is something that is effective? Well, I know there are teachers on here right now from District 99, Cicero, and I'm going to be having some quotes for you tonight. Here is one. We tried having our students draw from memory without referencing the chapter, and we were so impressed by what they produced. The level of detail and recall was great. This was a first grade class using retrieval. Retrieval is effective. Thank you, Cicero. So, time to ponder. In your classrooms or at home, do your students review? Do they review for tests? Do they review for exams? Or do they retrieve? Something to ponder. I talked about 4 tools. I just finished talking about retrieval. The second one is spacing. And I define spacing as, excuse me, revisiting retrieval over time. Teachers, do you ever get these looks from students? Parents, do you ever get these looks from your children? You know they were in the room when the instruction was given, yet it's gone. They have forgotten. And that's okay because actually forgetting is a part of learning. And it is so common. There's something that's actually called the forgetting curve. What does it mean? Unfortunately, for teachers, for parents, it means as soon as we have learned something, we start forgetting it. And here is a diagram of the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve that within 20 minutes, We are down to remembering only 58%. And if we wait a day, it's down to 33. So when you've asked your child to do something yesterday, chances are they don't remember. If we ask our students something, there's a good chance they won't remember because of the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. A wonderful author from the UK, her name is Emma Turner, has written several books for the younger grades. This one is from her book Initium. She says that recognize that forgetting is inevitable. It's going to happen. But believing we are powerless to mitigate for its effect is not. We know about the forgetting curve. We know what happens, but we also know just what to do. Now, for teachers, you might want to, because it's way too busy to read, Doug Lemov has a great book called Teach Like a Champion. And this is one of the best annotated forgetting curves that I have ever seen. And it really shows how often you should space out in order to maximize the ability to retrieve information. But what should be spaced? Obviously, we can't space everything, or it would be like Groundhog's Day. We would never, ever get ahead. So take a look. What's really important? Teachers, what is really important? What do your students need to know for the test, for the next chapter, for the next unit? These are what I call the big ticket items. Parents, what's really, really important for your children to remember? These are the things you want to retrieve. I liken it to a train trip. That when you are teaching something for the first time, it's like you're at the train station. You're getting on the train. And the final destination is going to be an exam, what they need to know for the next chapter, the next year, what you want your child to remember. But all of those stops that the train makes in between on that destination, these are the times to space out retrieval. Learning is messy. We learn, we forget. So we space it and we retrieve it again. And we forget. And the process continues until this information is retrieved enough times that it gets into our long term memory. And that is the goal that we want to have. So I've talked about retrieval and I've talked about spacing. I'm now going to talk about interleaving. And I define interleaving as comparing and contrasting similar items. So once I was giving a presentation and a science teacher said, okay, I teach science. So does this mean that I should interleave biology and chemistry? No, it does not, which is why there is a picture of a fruit salad on there, which may have confused you a little bit. But I have a picture of a fruit salad on there because if you were making a fruit salad, you might put in an apple, a banana, a pear, kiwi, grapes, but you wouldn't add a tomato. Even though a tomato is a fruit, it just doesn't go. And so when we're teaching and we're interleaving, we want to compare and contrast similar items. There's another wonderful book called Make It Stick. Two of the authors are Dr. Mark McDaniel and Dr. Henry Roediger, who were the cognitive scientists in my classroom. And they talked about interleaving, and they compared it to being a baseball or a softball coach. Now you might be at practice and your pitcher might throw 10 fastball, 10 slow balls, 10 curveballs, and the batter is always going to know precisely what's coming and they don't really have to think about it. On the other hand, if You talk to your pitcher and you say, switch it up. Give a slow ball, two fastballs, a curveball. By doing that, every time your batter is ready to hit that ball, they have to take everything they know about hitting the ball to make the best possible hit. That is what we want for our children. That is what we want for our students. We don't want them to just automatically know what's happening, what's coming. We want them to think, to process, to come up, to critically think with the best possible answers they can. This is a study I want to share with a fourth grade math class. Now, during this particular session, the students were being taught how to solve a particular type of problem. And the class was divided into two. One did blocking, which meant they did the same type of problem over and over and over and over. If you ever want your students to ace a test, test them the second you're done teaching because they'll know it. The other students were interleaving, which means they had problems and different types of formulas, and they had to figure out which formula to use. Well, at the end of class, you can see they were given a quiz. And sure enough, those who blocked aced it 100%, and those who were interleaving still were kind of trying to figure out how best to solve the problems. But I think this is interesting. The next day, 24 hours later, they were given a similar quiz. What do you think? How many of you have ever crammed for a test? You probably pulled an all-nighter and you did great that next morning. And a month later, could you remember anything on that test? No, most likely you could not. Can you remember anything 10 or 20 years later? What was the Krebs cycle? I know, I learned it. Just because we learn something doesn't mean we're going to remember it unless we can get it into our long-term memory and retrieve it. This is blocking and interleaving. The top bar, again, is when you do something over and over and over and over, and then over and over again. Many of our textbooks are written like this. For example, I taught world history. If we take a look at the top bar, you might think, okay, I taught all about the Nile, the geography, the history, and then you know what? I gave a test and my textbook went right on to the Tigris and Euphrates. And then I gave a test and then it went right on to something else, never going back. The bottom is interleaving. And I would interleave by using essential questions. So, for example, in what I was just talking about, ancient river civilizations, and again, this was sixth graders, 11-year-olds, I would begin every unit, for example, on the ancient river civilizations by having a question on the board, which was, how did flooding impact the ancient river civilizations? So when I studied the Nile, I talked about the history, the geography, and I talked about flooding. And by the way, flooding was like very cool in the Nile River. I will digress because I have to share this. These ancient Egyptians from before the year zero knew there was one particular star in the sky. That star was Sirius. And they knew it would be out for, I can't remember how many days, and then it would disappear for, I can't remember how many days, but the ancient Egyptians knew. And as soon as that star came out, flooding would happen. The ancient Egyptians knew this. They had figured it out. So they knew when to plant their crops. They even had what was called cubits. So next to the Nile, they would have a cubit. It's from your elbow to your fingertips, like stair steps going up. And depending on how much flooding occurred that year, how many cubits, they would know how much water would be there for irrigating. This was BCE, before the Common Era, and they knew this. I digress. Next was the Tigris and Euphrates, who never had a clue when it was going to flood. And so many times entire civilizations were wiped out. So, back to my essential question. As we studied the geography and the history, the students were always looking back at flooding. Same thing as I went through the other two ancient river civilizations. So by the time we finished that unit, my students wrote an incredible essay, interleaving, comparing, and contrasting. One of my favorite things at the end of the year with my 11-year-olds was giving them an end of the year essay. And I would simply ask them, because again, I taught world history, I taught history, I taught religious backgrounds. I would have a question: given the historical and religious backgrounds between countries A and B, I would just change it. What are the ramifications of either one or both having nuclear power capabilities? And my students wrote essays on that. Now, something I neglected to say is I taught in a very small district in southern Illinois. And if you were in sixth grade, you had me. It didn't matter what your ability level was, higher, lower. If you had 504s, IEPs, you had me. And every single one of my 11-year-olds could answer that essay question, interleaving. And now we get to the fourth. So I've talked about retrieval, spacing, interleaving, and finally metacognition. And I define metacognition as discriminating what you know from what you don't. I'm going to start by testing yours. Please, nobody shout out any answers. Don't talk to your neighbor. But who was Lady Murasaki Shikibu? My students loved saying her name. Now, the great thing is, right away, you either knew if you knew that, or if you thought, I've never heard that name before in my entire life. That is your metacognition telling you what you know versus what you don't. Just to let you know, she was a Japanese princess who lived around the year 1000, who is credited for writing the world's first novel, The Tale of Genji, about a magical puppet. Now, when you're on Jeopardy, you're going to know the answer. But that is metacognition. And too often, we do not give our students the opportunity to test their metacognition until there is a test. What we need to do is to practice retrieval throughout the course of study. Assessments should not be a gotcha. Instead, assessments should be celebrations. In fact, in my classroom, I never used the word assessment. I never used the word test. I said, oh, in 3 days, it is our celebration over ancient Egypt. Because it was, because students knew so much. This is what we want for our students. We don't want them to feel anxious. We want them to go in celebrating all that they have learned. Here is from a 7th grade science class. For this study, it's over a chapter material, and the material was divided. Three. One, it was another, it was taught, and a quiz was given midway through. And the quiz did not give any feedback. It was like getting a quiz that said 8 out of 10 at the top. but no feedback. And the other was a quiz. A quiz was given, one quiz midway through, where elaborate feedback was given why answers were correct. And you can see scores went from an 80% to a 94% simply by having that one quiz giving feedback. We often think that feedback is only for incorrect responses. However, the fact is, yes, it improves wrong responses. But in addition, sometimes our students guess. They get things right and they don't know why. So we always want to make sure when we give feedback, we explain why something is correct. It helps our metacognition, and it also helps because sometimes students really think that they know something, but they don't. It's incorrect. They have what's called false metacognition. And so using metacognition can help alleviate that. And we have tools. I'm going to give you strategies at the end. I have strategies so you don't get into an arguing match with that student. Instead, ooh, they can see it all on their own. Why? Why do we use the science of learning with retrieval and spacing and interleaving and metacognition? Because we know this leads to robust learning for all students. I want to talk to parents. And this is my second book, A Parent's Guide to Powerful Teaching. When I wrote this book, I wanted it to be less than 100 pages. I wanted it to be in a conversational tone, just the way I would talk to the parents of my students. I also wanted a book that teachers can share with parents to talk about learning, but this is also for parents, what you can do at home. Because powerful learning is not a secret code. There are over 53 million students in the United States whose parents are not certified educators. And oftentimes, we all have been through the educational settings. And oftentimes, as parents, we tend to encourage the very strategies because they worked for us, they will work for my child. But we now know so much more, and it is not a secret code. In fact, I call it the teaching triangle. And the teaching triangle is that all important collaboration between student, parent, and teacher, because so much of this information can be applied at home. When we know that students start forgetting things as soon as they learn them, and we know they need to retrieve, think how effective it is if parents have particular questions at home at night to ask their children. It gets, rather than saying, "Oh, how was your day?" Because we know the answer to that. But instead, if you have, in fact, I know teachers, I know some in this room right now, who tend to send home questions along with answers because parents will want to make sure their student is giving the correct answer, testing that metacognition. But we have an important collaboration. Parents can assist teachers in reinforcing and retrieving this information. If a teacher sends home a question from something from 2 weeks ago, instead of a parent thinking, "Why are you doing this? You learned this 2 weeks ago." When a parent knows about learning, they'll know, Mrs. Haven is spacing. Okay? We become this collaboration. I did a national survey, a national parent survey, where I asked, what are 2 top things that would help you with your child's learning? Teacher, what do you think your parents would say? Parents, how would you answer that? The survey says, is this not a universal concern? How can I best help my child study? How much is too much? How much is not enough? We know we can help. And the other in this survey was understanding the basics of learning. We can collaborate and have the best possible outcome for our students, for our children. Where do we start? Of course, using the power tools, retrieval, spacing, interleaving, metacognition. And let's also add load and front loading. Dr. Dylan William, very wonderful person, very intelligent, says cognitive load theory is the single most important thing for teachers to know. What is it? It refers to the amount of mental capacity available in our working memory at any given time. Now I'm going to paraphrase a rather popular phrase in a minute. But first, I'm going to do a quick explanation. Working memory and long-term memory. Working memory is located in this part of our brain, and long-term memory is located back here. Now, we know that our working memory is very limited, and our long-term memory, infinite. It's unlimited. And the goal for learning is to get information, this new information from working memory into long-term memory. But how limiting is working memory? Here's the popular, I'm going to paraphrase. Are you ready? My daughter's going to cringe. 4-7. Now, you might be thinking, oh, Patrice, it's 6-7. No, it's 4-7 because that is what our working memory can hold at any one given time. And so when you think about working memory, I want you to get the 6-7 out and I want you to think 4-7. Okay? Because if we experience more than 4 to 7 things, we go into cognitive overload. Have you ever been driving and suddenly you're in your driveway? And it's like, whoa, when did I get off the highway? When did I make that turn? Here I am. On the other hand, I was presenting in England and the steering wheel is on a different side of the car and you drive in a different lane and we complain about a roundabout or two here. Whoa! And not just 3, but we're talking 8. This is what I felt like, and I wasn't even driving. This is cognitive overload. We know it. What happens when you are on cognitive overload? You lose your keys. You can't remember where you parked the car. You misplace whatever that bill, that stack of papers. When this happens, all you have to do is take a deep breath and say, I'm experiencing cognitive overload. But also think about our students who have a class and then boom, another class, and then boom, another class. Remembering they can only remember how many things at a time? 4, 6. The internet. And so you might think, oh, this is like Pinterest worthy, right? Look at this gorgeous room. Well, here's the teacher and here's a student, and we can remember 4 to 7 new things. So if this student is sitting here, the red triangle, and the teacher is teaching something new, how distracted is that student going to be? Think of the cognitive overload that that student is experiencing. Furthermore, take a look at where that student is sitting. Are they even looking at the teacher? Are they thinking, oh, there's a game. There's a game on the table. When are we going to play the game? Oh, there's markers. What are we going to do with the markers? What's that paper for? How many times does this happen in a classroom where we trust our students because cognitive load? Here's another one. If you're attempting to teach, how much cognitive overload is your student going to be experiencing? How can we minimize it? By all means, decorate your room, but not behind where you're going to be standing to do your direct teaching. Have it student work, beautiful, colorful, but not behind you when you're teaching. Have out only the supplies that are needed, not a game that's going to be played in 45 minutes, not colors that are going to be used in 20, just what is needed for the time. New information, important information. Students who have not mastered their math facts might be working at a problem at their desk, and there's a big, beautiful poster of math facts up there. So they have to look from their paper up, try to figure out, now, where is that? By the time they get back, they've kind of forgotten what the problem was. And so much is going on, it creates cognitive overload. Something so simple, have math facts on a small piece of paper right next to them on their desk. They can read the problem, look over, back and forth. There are so many ways to minimize cognitive overload. Same for parents with your kids at home. And finally, think and talk in bullet points. Instead of giving 5 instructions, talk in a bullet point. Make it short, make it sweet, and pause. Let it sink in before you go on to the next. Let me give an example of working memory. I'm going to give you a list of letters. I'm going to give you 5 seconds. Do not write them down. I'm going to put up a blank screen. I'm going to see how many you can remember. Because the average is what? Are we ready? Now, write down. How many can you remember? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the same letters in the same order. It starts with a P for Patrice and ends with a B for Bain. Now, if I gave you, what would you need? 3 seconds? You would be able to master all of these. Daniel Willingham tells us background knowledge allows chunking, which makes more room in working memory, making it easier to relate to ideas and therefore easier to comprehend. When we are bringing forth new information, it is so important that we link this new information in the working memory to something that they already have in their long-term memory. One of the ways we do this is by front loading. Something so important, the most important single factor in influencing learning is what the learner already knows. Make sure when we are teaching a new concept, whether it is parents, whether it is teachers, this new information, link it just like CNN, HGTV, because your students will be able to grasp it so much easier. In my class, I would do it through pre-tests. And in my pre-test, I started every unit, every chapter with a pre-test where I would present questions, multiple choice questions, where I could link to previous learning. I could set the stage for what we will be learning. I could give elaborative feedback of why this was correct. And it gave me, as we got to this within our chapter, opportunities to space out retrieval. Dr. Shauna Carpenter has a great phrase. She calls it pretrieval. I like that. But does it work? So in my class, uh, our hypothesis was retrieval works. So the first study we did for a year was studying retrieval. But if our hypothesis was that retrieval worked, it wouldn't be ethical to us to have some kids retrieve and some kids not. So what we did was we took the chapter test and the questions became the control group. And so then what happened was I would teach the way I normally would teach. And a cognitive scientist would then, actually Dr. Pooja Agarwal, who's the co-author of my book, Powerful Teaching, she would come in and give the students a quiz over some of the questions. I was not in the room. I didn't know which questions. I had 6 different sections. They all had different questions. I just simply taught as normal, gave the test as normal, graded as normal, and then handed them to the cognitive scientists where they would do the statistics. And we saw that simply by having a quiz, having the students retrieve went from an 81% to 94%, simply by having a quiz with elaborative feedback. But then we thought at the end of the year, what if we gave a pop final? And it was pop because we didn't want anybody to know about it because we didn't want them to study. It also didn't go in the grade book because that wouldn't have been fair. So imagine if you gave your students a pop final at the end of the school year, no clue it was even coming, no way to even look at a note. They remembered 79% of what was taught without any studying whatsoever. Isn't this what we want for our students? Don't we want them to retain this information? Yes, it works. I have run into former students 6 years, 10 years out who still remember things. My favorite happened this spring. I ran into a former student who I had not seen in 22 years. And he starts by asking me the dreaded question, Mrs. Bain, do you remember me? Oh my. When he was 11, he had no facial hair, but he did have hair up here. And he was shorter than I was, and he was now about 6'4". So I said, let me peer into your eyes. And as I did, I said, it's Robbie. And sure enough, he started rattling off all these things that he had learned in my class 22 years earlier. His wife looked at him like, who are you? But he just knew all this information. Why? Because this worked. So let's get to strategies in our last 5 minutes. And these are featured in my third book, Powerful Classrooms. I wanted to elevate the voices of teachers, amplify those teacher voices who are using the science of learning in their classrooms. This book has over 50 strategies and over 100 resources. Let's go. Every day I started my class with a mini quiz. I took whatever we discussed the day before, cut it up in little slips of paper, put it in a basket. Students came in, they got a little, I called a mini quiz because I used 2x3-inch recycled pieces of paper. They numbered 1 through 5. I would simply randomly choose out 5 They'd write them down. I'd collect them. I'd go over, give elaborative feedback. Instead of grading for 2 hours every night, it took me a 15-minute analysis after school to see what my students were had in their retrieval. Students loved this as I went over it the next day. Students did not see errors as failures. Instead, errors became the roadmaps of which direction to take. That is a crucial mindset for our students. A favorite story, I had a parent come in who was not quite too happy at parent teacher conferences. And she said to me, I talked to my son and I said, why don't you do better on these mini quizzes? You keep missing 1, 2, 3. And she said, do you know what he said to me? He said, oh, Mom, don't worry about it. It was just my metacognition telling me I couldn't retrieve it yet. 11 years old. She said, what kind of an answer is that? And I said, the very best kind. Got out the grade book. He scored 100% on every single test. It's okay. This is why we have retrieval throughout the course of study. Let students understand what they don't yet know before you ever get to a test. I came up with what I call the 4 steps of metacognition. If you will just read these briefly. And now let's see how they work. I used to give flashcards, where you give them a word and they look up and write it down from the back of the book and they don't even know what it means right after they've done it. So I switched to retrieval cards. And I would give a name or a definition and use the 4 steps. Number 1, do you know it or not? Put a star if you do, a happy face. I'm sorry, a star if you know it, a question mark if you don't. For younger kids, a happy face. This is so important to also do at home. When students come home with something, give them a piece of paper, have them write either a term or a definition, and that's it. That's all they do. Step 2, without using any books or notes, answer those that you know. Step 3, now get out your books, your notes, look up what you don't know. And step 4, verify. Now, I would give these on a sheet of paper with either the term or the definition. The students, I love this because the students made a JOL or a judgment of learning, whether they knew it or not, right then or there. They were able to answer it. If they didn't know it, look it up, verify. Remember when I talked earlier about students who think they know something, but tells them right there. Beauty, you don't have to grade any of these. The students are doing the heavy lifting. And furthermore, because they put question marks over things they didn't know, when it comes time to study for that test, boom, they know precisely where to focus their time. I also created metacognition sheets. I would give these about a week to 3 or 4 days before. And you can see same 4. Do you know it or not? Answer those that you know. Look up those that you don't. Verify those that you do. And you can see I have simple recall like definition or, who was Maximilian Robespierre. But I also had essential questions on there. How did the lives of working people change as a result of revolutions? Now, the same thing happens. The students, because they identified, they already know exactly what to study. Now, parents at home, especially getting ready for AP exams, getting ready to go off to college, if when your student is working at home, have them make retrieval cards by either putting the name or a definition. Have them fill out a metacognition sheet with only the name or definition. Put it away. Bring it out a week later. Can you answer it? Can you retrieve it? Go through the 4 steps and you're going to know precisely what you need to do to study for a test. For my 6th grade class, I would have retrieval guides. We read out loud because there were things like Queen Amata Shakate or Lady Murasaki Chikibu. And I wanted my students to be able to understand, to know how to pronounce things. So we would read out loud together. However, instead of a study guide, we did a retrieval guide. I made the retrieval guides because I knew what important information I wanted the students to have. And I also knew when to stop, when to have the students close their books and then retrieve. They weren't copying, they were retrieving. And then we would go over the answers before we reopened the books so the students could make sure their answers were correct. For older students, giving a blank, something like this. Several reasons I like this. Do you ever have that student who works ahead? They can't work ahead if they don't know what the category is. Okay? Also, do you have the students who are trying to take down everything you're saying and their notes are a jumbled mess? Because you are the teacher, you know precisely when to stop, when to have the students take their notes. By the time class is over, they have every important detail you need them to have in a well-organized fashion so they can study for exams. Retrieve taking when you are teaching. Teach, have a PowerPoint, be reading, whatever, and then pause. Close the books, put up a blank screen. Have the students retrieve, have them write. Have them share with a neighbor, do a group share, get the PowerPoint back on. Again, what happens is your students have perfectly wonderful, effective notes. You know when to pause, and that's to get that information. Simple thing is a blast from the past. If I did one right now, what are the 3 steps of learning? Encoding, storage, and retrieval. Just throwing out a question. You are doing retrieval. Fun activities, doing retrieval dice. If they're first grade and beyond, they can cut them out themselves and use their glue sticks and saves you a lot of work. Every teacher deserves to understand how teaching happens in order to prioritize and focus the work. And I must, even though I'm going over a little bit, I have to talk about neuromyths. Back in, I believe it was 2012, I was invited by the Department of Education to go to Washington, D.C. and work with cognitive scientists and one other teacher, Blake Harvard, who's going to be an upcoming speaker, where we looked at neuromyths. How can we dispel these neuromyths? So what are some of them? That we are left brain or right brained? No, we are whole brained. We have our working memory and we have our long-term memory. It is not left or right. We use our whole brains. We only use 10% of our brain. Also not true. But the one thing that drives me crazy because it refuses to die, learning styles. There is absolutely zero research that backs up that using learning styles promotes learning. Tell a child what to think, and you will help them pass that day's assessment. But teach them how to think, and they can learn independently for a lifetime. Combining research and practice leads to robust learning. Embrace the science of learning and extend that invitation. On almost every slide, you saw the sparks. We were very intentional when we came up with those sparks way back in the first book, because learning should be joyous, sparks. And There are four representing the power tools: retrieval, spacing, interleaving, and metacognition. But that big blue spark, that's you, because you represent all that you can do to change the educational trajectories for every single student in your class. You have the power to become a powerful teacher with powerful learning. My link tree there has my articles and podcasts and my website and all sorts of information if you would like to take a picture of that. Please, let's connect. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on X, I'm on Blue Sky. I'm connected with awesome people who are kindred spirits with what I've been talking about. So thank you, and I'm sorry I went over a little bit. If you have any Q&A, I will try to do that now. If you have to go, I'm going to be back on November 22nd for, oh, what's it called? Coffee Chat. And I will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you. I'm having to do some things here.
The last thing this video needs is another copy of me.
All right, hold on.
All right. Um, we are actually, I copy and pasted, we have three questions in the Q&A. I didn't notice any in the chat. And so I copy and pasted those to save for next Saturday just to respect people's time, if that's okay, Patrice. But please never apologize for going over it. I mean, I could sit and listen to you talk all evening. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. It has been such an incredible, informative evening. It's very encouraging and inspiring to hear all the things that we could be doing for our students. So thank you very much for sharing so much of your wisdom and expertise with us. If you enjoyed tonight's webinar, please consider joining the Reading League as a member or renewing your membership so that you can stay abreast of the upcoming events. And please join us for our new format for our coffee chats. Again, Patrice will be joining us to answer some questions and then to continue talking about learning science next Saturday. If you're interested, you can go to the website and click join us or scan the QR code that's on the next page and it'll take you directly to the membership form where you become a member or just add a donation if you prefer. Finally, for those of you who would like to receive PD hours, there's a link here that you can type directly into your URL or into your address bar, or you can scan the QR code on the screen. To verify that you attended the full webinar, the form will ask you to enter a secret phrase, which is powerful for all of Patrice's powerful information in our books. A PDF certificate will be emailed to you for CEUs. For Illinois PD hours, we'll email you the evaluation form. Actually, I think we all updated this and you should get it immediately. So thank you again, Patrice, for sharing your time and knowledge this evening. And thank you, audience members, for being here, for showing up for your students in your care, and for your commitment to helping every child learn to read. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.